Agrippinilla's arrest came swiftly and without appeal. Before the legions at Mogontiacum, her brother convened a military tribunal and presided over it alone. Caligula accused her of treason, judged her guilt, and then pronounced her punishment. Before the army that had so loved her father, she was sentenced. Exile. But not before she was made to endure a ritual humiliation, one meant not only for her, but for all of Italy to witness. Escorted by soldiers of the Rhine, Agrippinilla was marched away from the frontier. In her hands, mirroring her mother's long walk across Italy with the ashes of Germanicus, the sister of the emperor carried the remains of Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, her cousin, the man named as her co-conspirator, and her lover. But, where her widowed mother had once walked from town to town bearing the ashes of her murdered husband, received with tears, with honour, and with public lamentation, Agrippinilla passed amid hisses and jeers. No crowds gathered to mourn. No matrons came forward to touch the urn. Instead, garbage rained down at her feet. Rotten fruit, spittle, hurled by citizens eager to demonstrate their loyalty to the emperor by reviling his fallen sister. The gesture was unmistakable. What had once been a procession of grief was now inverted, twisted into a spectacle of disgrace. But something was amiss. The letters Caligula had brandished before the assembled legions, proof, he claimed, of her participation in the conspiracy with Lepidus and Gaetulicus, were never produced for her to examine. No evidence was placed before her. No defence permitted. The only letters Agrippinilla had been shown were her own. Foolish, careless notes written a year earlier, to Tigellinus, the handsome young man upon whom she had chosen to practice the arts of flirtation and seduction. Embarrassing, perhaps. Reckless, certainly. But those letters would bring down no empires. Between Lepidus and herself, there had been no correspondence, at least not yet. As a great-granddaughter of the divine Augustus, Agrippinilla's thoughts had inevitably turned to Lepidus after Drusilla's death, her sister's widower, and a man also descended from Augustus. But thought was not action. And Agrippinilla had acted on nothing before Lepidus was dragged north with her brother on campaign. How could she have? Lepidus, like all of Rome, was still in mourning for Drusilla, and Agrippinilla was not naive enough to believe a clandestine affair, one that her brother would immediately recognise as a political threat, would remain discreet. Rome kept no secrets. Eventually, they all found their way to the light, and Caligula, she knew all too well, was in the midst of erasing every shadow that might one day stand against him. Yet, in every town she passed through, the crowd knew exactly what to call her. Whore, adulteress, wanton. They shouted the words as if they were facts, as if they had witnessed the crime themselves. Because the focus of Agrippinilla's guilt released for public consumption did not centre on treason, but on sex. A scandalous tale that she, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, and her sister Livilla had formed a triangle of love and corruption, a conspiracy of bodies as much as of ambition. It was easier that way. Rome understood lust far better than letters. A woman undone by appetite was more satisfying than a woman removed for politics. And so, Agrippinilla walked beneath a verdict she knew was false, condemned not only as a traitor, but as something worse in the Roman imagination. A woman who had forgotten her place. Agrippinilla stood with her eyes fixed straight ahead, the urn containing Lepidus's ashes still cradled in her arms. Around her, the people of Rome pressed close in a dense, uneasy silence, brows furrowed, breath held, waiting for the emperor's judgment. High above her on the rostra, Caligula regarded his sister for a long moment without speaking. Then he did. "Pontia," he declared. A ripple moved through the crowd. "You will go to Pontia," Caligula continued, "and on a clear day you will be able to see Pandateria, the island of Livilla's exile. Agrippinilla's heart dropped. Pontia was the island to which her eldest brother Nero Caesar had been sent, the place where he had been starved to death, and where soldiers had left his unburied bones lying on the floor of his villa. And Pandateria, Livilla's fate, was no kinder. It was the island where their grandmother Julia had withered away in exile, and where their mother, Agrippina, had lost her own life. Then Agrippinilla saw her. A woman emerged onto the rostra and took her place beside the emperor's allies, settling herself with an ease that suggested she belonged there. Her name reached Agrippinilla only as rumour. Milonia Caesonia, an equestrian woman, older, the sister of Gnaeus Domitius Corbulo, whom Caligula had recently elevated to share his current consulship. Agrippinilla's gaze dropped, unbidden, to the curve of the woman's body. So, the whispers were true. Caesonia, already mother to 3 daughters from a previous marriage, was said to be carrying the emperor's child, and Caligula promised to marry Caesonia only after the birth was complete. Standing below, the urn heavy in her arms, Agrippinilla felt the pieces lock into place. This was not justice. This was replacement. Caligula had allied himself with another house, and Agrippinilla and Livilla, imperial women whose blood and wombs could challenge this unborn child, were being pushed out of the way. As Agrippinilla was led from the forum, still bearing the ashes of Lepidus, another question pressed itself into her thoughts, quieter than the crowd, but far more dangerous. How long had this alliance existed? Had it been forged only recently? Or had it begun much earlier, before Drusilla's sudden marriage to Lepidus, before her illness, her death, her elevation to goddess, a deification that conveniently benefited Caligula more than anyone? Agrippinilla stood in the atrium of her new home, a decaying villa on the island of Pontia. Tears burned behind her eyes as she wondered, would she ever see her son again? She had been granted only moments to say goodbye to him, and to her husband, Enobarbus, before the soldiers closed in. As she was marched from the house, surrounded by armed men, a scene echoed too closely to the memory of her mother's removal. She caught the smug expressions of her sisters-in-law, Domitia and Lepida. They had never liked her, and now they could happily resume control of their brother's household. Agrippinilla's gaze fell to the floor. It was from this very villa that Caligula had ordered the unburied remains of her brother, Nero Caesar, finally gathered, bones left to bleach where he had starved, forgotten, disposed of only when it suited the living. Was that to be her fate as well? To never see her child again? To be reduced in time to unattended bones, collected by a stranger? 25 years earlier, upon the death of her great-grandfather Augustus, Agrippinilla's grandmother Julia, a woman she had never known, had been confined to a single room and left to starve on the orders of Rome's new emperor, Tiberius. 14 years after that, when her great-grandmother, the Augusta Livia Drusilla, died, Agrippinilla's aunt Julilla met the same end, abandoned on the island of Tremarus, once the funds for her upkeep, long provided by Livia, were no longer available. And her mother, Agrippina, it was said, had starved herself to death on Pandateria when she had learned of the fate of Agrippinilla's other brother, Drusus Caesar, whom hunger had driven to eat the stuffing from his mattress. But how was this possible? Tiberius had ordered her kept alive through force-feeding. Had she really taken her own life? Or had she, like the others, just been abandoned? Her mother, grandmother, aunt and brothers were all starved to death once they became inconvenient. Political liabilities erased not by execution, but by neglect. Agrippinilla swallowed hard. For now, her exile was funded by Caligula's command. Her food, her guards, her breath itself depended on his attention. But once that child was born to Caesonia, once another heir cried out in Rome, would anyone still remember to send the money? Or would she too be allowed to fade quietly into neglect, until hunger finished what exile had begun. Then Agrippinilla remembered Albusilla, her husband's former mistress, the courtesan accused of treason, who had surrendered to despair before judgment could even be passed, choosing death rather than waiting for Rome to decide her fate. Agrippinilla shook her head. No, she would not yield, as Albusilla had yielded. She would not wait, passive and obedient, for Caligula to forget her, to starve her quietly, like so many before her. Her survival would be her own responsibility.